Okay, so my name is Tim Bailey. I'm a Forest Health Watershed Coordinator for 7 counties in the North Coast. I'm directly working for Humboldt County Resource Conservation District, but I'm working under the Department of Conservation's Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. My role is to develop forest health projects, and interestingly, I have not been working directly in biochar recently, but this is basically bringing back kind of a long-term interest. And since I'm working on projects that are somewhat similar in aligning larger scale public interests with major forest health investments, it seemed like a appropriate place. But basically, I've just been interested in biochar for a while. I've attended a couple conferences and been keeping track of the information. And then I had worked with Carrie and Jennifer Curtis and Cindy Walk about 5 years ago on a sediment budget for Malakoff-Diggins. And so that was one of the reasons why I guess I found myself here. And then the other work that's actually my work was I did an instrumental methods project on electron microscopy on wildfire generated charcoals. But my current role is developing shared stewardship projects and other forest health projects across basically from Humboldt County to Marin. So I'm trying to identify projects on a variety of ownerships that are similar to the kinds that Dotrick just presented. So the way I've been looking at this is that my job is to assemble what we've been come to call enterprise forest treatment complexes. And similar to the way one of our prior speakers discussed, finding value chains that connect beneficiaries of forest health projects besides the traditional logging kind of value chain. So in particular, my work's been really funded by the California Climate Investments Program, where we can basically direct money through CAL FIRE grants to large regional forest health projects. And so we're basically aligning money that the state is developing for enhanced carbon sequestration in our forests, and then potentially other values. And I think that the Yuba Water Agency's identification of the value change it was benefiting from the forest health treatment is exactly the kind of project that we really want to encourage, because we think of statewide there's this management deficit on historically managed lands that is growing, and the term pace and scale are we're just not meeting the needs of our landscapes in many cases. So this is just a brief look at the work I did on Malakoff-Diggins, and I did both LiDAR work and then oblique photogrammetry to look at the sediment source area, and that was just a familiarization. But the reason I think Carrie wanted me to speak was specifically that to address how biochar can be used in conjunction, how we can develop projects that are both reinforcing our fire resilience and improving our ability to sequester carbon and have more intact ecosystems, while also being able to treat these really unique and challenging environmental stressors that hydraulic mines represent. Now, the difficulty with this is biochar properties are not very consistent. This is a sample of essentially a 5 centimeter long or wide cross section of a tree that was burned in a 2013 fire, and it's expressing significant heterogeneity within that span. So as we're thinking about trying to develop biochar approaches for potentially producing hundreds of, potentially thousands of tons of biochar to treat mines, we're going to have to confront this question about what kind of quality that we're willing to pay for, and what kind of what's the highest benefit and highest use. And so there's this emerging conversation in the biochar research community about designer biochar, and that's really driven by controlling the feedstock and controlling the temperature processes. And there's some really amazing organic chemistry engineering going on with biochar formation. But we have this tension between, is this about treating this mass landscape with, potentially yielding 50, 60, 70 tons of biochar feedstock per hectare, or are we looking at this as, are we trying to design the specific biochars that are going to be most effective at treating our mercury or whatever heavy metal or whatever the pollution profile that we're actually trying to treat. We're from I think that the mercury remediation problem is possibly the best example of why we would develop an expensive treatment program. Okay, so these are adapted from another talk, and I just wanted to lay out some of two of the major policy vehicles that are driving my work is California Forest Carbon Plan, and then the governor's wildfire emergency declaration. And these two policies bear on this for the kind of treatments that Dotrick is brought up in the last talk. These two objectives are not necessarily aligned. There's the fire resilience goals, and there are climate adaptation goals that there are definitely some of the climate forestry work has been developing plantations that are not the most resilient landscapes. So from my perspective, the work has to basically achieve both of these goals simultaneously. And we've been going through some significant climate hardships, as our drought in the last over the last 8 years was one of the severe in our record of late Holocene. We've had what we need out of forest health treatments is we have the opportunity to reinvest significant amounts of money. In the last cycle, there was almost $90 million in forest health proceeds that were derived from, they're a fraction of the California Climate Investments Program. In order to make projects satisfy the needs of that program, you have to demonstrate your climate benefits. And typically the climate benefits are through plot-based data. The biochar situation is kind of intriguing. So far, biochar is not approved by the Air Resources Board as a climate offsets as a practical basis. What we typically expect biochar to have about a 50-fold increase in resistance to oxidation over the material that it's made out of. So when we do a pruning or a thinning, and there's you know, the production of a vast amount of slash. You know, there's a variety of ways that we can deal with it, but the potential for turning into biochar could provide a significant change in the emissions profile of that forestry project. So there's a FluxNet project that estimated that there's yeah, it was about a 50-fold increase in ponderosa pine biochar over the material that it was made out of. This is a graph of kind of the income that or the price per ton that the Area Resources Board receives for carbon offsets, and we've been given guidance that this auction floor is going to increase for the duration of the through the authorization in 2030. And so the assumption is that there's going to be more forestry projects that are going to be viable from for forest health funding as the program continues, because basically the auction price floor will increase. Yeah. So Biochars Properties, typically it increases pH, it has high cation exchange capacities, highly resistant to oxidation, high pore capacity, and improves water soil behavior. For mine remediation, it's been demonstrated to be highly effective at absorbing heavy metals. I think that one of the problems that we've had is that we have not had big enough of scale of experiments, and I think that the biochar projects tend to be we need to start scaling them to the size of the problem. And so I think identifying individual mines that are treatable, and then maybe having controls, and then actually looking at conversion of potentially thousands of tons of forest biomass into biochar for a treatment is going to be really important, so that we can actually evaluate the effectiveness of whether or not we can build a system that's appropriate for it. So this is a project that it predates my time, but this is an example of the kind of forest health project that the California Climate Investments has been funding. This is a BLM project, and it's I think it's analogous to a lot of situations where the treatment is basically enhancing the capacity of the stands to sequester carbon. It's improving its fire resilience. In this case, it's actually a treatment that's designed to limit the spread of a sudden oak death, which is a very concerning fatal disease to 35 tree species in the area. You can see here, this was a landscape that was treated with a grinder, that was a tracked grinder, and basically the debris is like left on you know, on site. So there was an increase in the material left on site, and it was basically leaving about 3 or 4 inches of chips spread across the site. This is 2 years after treatment. And you can see the untreated landscape right at the end of the picture. This was a different masticator. So this is just kind of a typical approach that we're using on the North Coast for these treatments. This was one of the machines that was used for this treatment. And this is kind of a view of an untreated landscape. So this is kind of the source area that's potentially available for biochar production. Now this is looking down, it's a steeper site, and you can see like hand piles that are, some of them are burned, some of them aren't, from another project. And I think that this is the kind of example of what's what can be implemented. So I'm gonna, this is the aftermath of a hand pile, you know, and one of the things that's come up in our region is hand piles are actually a major management challenge, just because you never know when you can actually get them burned. You know, with the fire seasons that we've been having and the human resource issues, they're just oftentimes they're made and then they're they wait around, and it's come up as an issue. So I'm going to go through a couple of different like opportunities of biochar production schemes that are available. The first one, this is the low tech, low capital, labor intensive scheme. So these two kilns are fairly inexpensive. They're just steel. They're light enough to be potentially carried a ways from a vehicle, but not too far. They're heavy, but they effectively produce biochar from relatively large pieces, but they don't necessarily have a consistent output of the product. So Kelpie Wilson is one of the people who's really developed this. She has this biochar cookbook, which is she's really explored a lot of the these low-tech methods that are kind of very reproducible and are basically just committing the human resources to achieve this. And one of the things that she's done is she's done some studies about the effectiveness of her biochar approaches in comparison to pile burning and jackpot burning and a variety of other scenarios. I think that there's not enough data yet to price how much you can produce, and that's a real shortfall, and something that I'm trying to get funded a project that will be doing a larger burn with kind of professionalizing a team that will maybe have about maybe 20 of these kilns, but this is not a sure thing yet. Okay, so then this was a biochar machine that is semi-portable, but is it's a challenging machine to operate. And CAL FIRE was never happy with this machine because it was always felt that it was too dangerous if it wasn't in an industrial site. So this machine was built with the intention of both being able to harvest harvest thermal energy in a mobile unit, and I think that that's just too technically challenging. So this machine is probably not going to run again, but it was an intriguing experiment. And this is the machine. This is the product. So they were producing most of their biochar was produced from tan oak that they were thinning in pre-commercial thins. Now this machine is, we've been looking at this very closely. There's one of these in Sonoma County, and this is like an 85-ton, what's called an air curtain machine. These cost about $675,000, but they can process probably 100 tons of biomass a day. The price is looking challenging on a project basis, but I think that there are circumstances, particularly in urban areas where there's highly restrictive air quality issues. These may be very appealing for large biomass projects. They only convert about 5 to 10% of the feedstock into biochar. So they're it's a complicated equation. We have not been able to figure out how to make this one pencil out yet either. But I think that there's definitely opportunities for for this kind of machine. There are other competitors that have smaller machines as well. Does anyone have any questions?